Assalamu alaikum students, welcome back to class. We're still continuing with Barn Burning by William Faulkner. So I'm going to quickly recap what we did in the last couple of lectures so that you know what point we are at. In your ENG553 American literature paper, we have been discussing different genres in American literature. We did Emerson's essay on self-reliance. We did a couple of short stories. You will remember Bartleby the Scrivener. We've done a few poems by Emily Dickinson, Robert Frost, T.S. Eliot, etc., etc. And now moving on through the times, according to the different movements in American literature, we have reached the time where we are doing William Faulkner's short story, Barn Burning. And the significance of the title, as I explained to you in the last couple of lectures also, was that the barn in agricultural United States was a very important place. It's the place where hay was stored and where animals were tied at night so that they would be dry. And I also explained to you that to a farmer or to an agriculturist, the farm animals are more important than the farmers themselves. So they will do their best to ensure that the farm animals are dry, that the farm animals are fed on time. Human beings can bear not to eat or drink, or can bear to be out in the cold. But farm animals are of primary importance to an agriculturist, and for that reason the building of the barn is a very important one. Just to recap what we did in the last couple of lectures, this story focuses around a family headed by a sharecropper or a farmer whose first name only we know, and that is Abner. He has 2 sons, 2 daughters, and in his household are his wife, his wife's sister, and of course his own children. So when the story opens, Abner is present before the justice of the peace, and he is accused of having burned down somebody's barn. Now that is a very serious thing to do, because as I just explained to you, the barn has primary importance for a landowner or an agriculturist. So just as the farm animals are important, so is the barn important. And when Abner is accused of burning down the farm, the accuser cannot find witnesses to the barn burning. He tries to call Abner's little boy, but then he says that the little boy cannot bear witness against the father. So the justice of the peace tells Abner that he cannot sentence him because there are no witnesses, but he advises him to leave the area. Abner in any case is leaving the area because, as we discussed yesterday, sharecroppers stayed on a land for a certain period of time, and once the harvesting was done and the crop had been distributed between the landlord and the sharecropper was free to move on. If he chose to stay, that was a different thing altogether. If there was a mutual agreement between the landowner and the sharecropper, that he would continue for another season, then of course the sharecropper would stay. But Abner, the kind of temperament that he has, finds it difficult to stay in one place for a long time. He's a hard worker. There's absolutely no doubt about that. He works very hard. He's physically strong. But he has the kind of temperament that doesn't make friends. It's very difficult for him to get along with people. You know, he's the strong, silent type who doesn't talk much, who will utter 2 words and everyone will rush to do his bidding. Because if you don't do what he tells you to, he has another way of dealing with it. And his little son, who's barely 10 years old, when he makes an attempt to say something against his father, the father slaps him, and that one slap stays in the memory of the boy. And it prevents him from doing anything like that in future, because when the father slaps him, he says, if you don't stand with the family, very soon you will not have a family. So for Abner, whatever he does has to have his family's support. Whether it is right or wrong is immaterial. So when he moves on to this other place, it's a 2 days travel, a 2 days journey, and when he comes here, he takes this little boy with him to visit the owner of the land, or the landlord. And when he reaches his house, without thinking anything, he enters the house, even though the black servant tells him to wipe his feet. Now Abner and his family have been traveling for 2 days, and Abner and his family have been traveling for 2 days, and in those 2 days, obviously, their clothes, their shoes have become very dirty. But Abner does not listen to the black servant, and he just barges into the house. He kicks the door wide open and he enters. Now when he enters, he doesn't realize that there's a beautiful golden rug right in the entrance. He goes and stands on it. Now when he goes and stands on it, the rug becomes dirty. There are dirty footprints on the rug. And of course the Negro servant or the black servant becomes very upset that this person has entered without wiping his feet. And so he calls out to the owner and he goes, "Miss Lula, Miss Lula, Miss Lula." So Miss Lula comes in and she doesn't even look at this sharecropper. All that she does is look at the place where he has put his feet. And she says, "Please go away. Major Despain is not at home. Please go away." So what he does is he turns right round and he leaves. Now as soon as he leaves the house, or even before he leaves the house, once the door has shut, Miss Lula starts screaming and wailing because her beautiful rug has been spoiled. So when her husband comes in, she complains to him, and by the time that Abner and his son have reached home, Major Despain comes rushing up with his black servant carrying that rug, and he says, "Now you clean these dirty footprints from this rug." So what Abner does is he tells his daughters to wash the rug. Now the daughters are very, very lazy. They're fat and they don't want to do any of the work. So what they do is they wash the rug half-heartedly, and then they drape it over a couple of chairs so that it will dry out. When it dries out, Abner takes his little son with him, whose name Faulkner does not reveal to us. That's one of the techniques that he uses. So he takes his little son, he takes the rug, and he goes and he dumps it outside the house. He doesn't even bother to wake anyone up. So the moment that he reaches back home after depositing the rug, Major D. Spain comes riding up, and the point at which we're going to resume the story is where Major D. Spain has come to Abner's house, and he is shouting at him and telling him that the rug is a very expensive one and his wife is very angry, and therefore Abner will have to pay for what he has done, because he spoiled that beautiful golden rug. So let us continue from there. The point at which we left off in the last lecture was where Major D. Spain is talking to Abner, but Abner totally ignores him, so that Major D. Spain is talking to Abner's back, because Abner continues with the work that he's doing, and he doesn't pay any attention to what Major D. Spain is saying. So Major D. Spain says, "You must realize you've ruined that rug." And he says, "Wasn't there anyone, any of your women?" Now he starts to imagine that Abner, being a white man, is in the same position as Major D. Spain. And then halfway through, he realizes that Abner is a sharecropper. He's a poor woman, a poor farmer. He doesn't have any servants. He himself does all the work. So he goes on to say that the rug cost $100, but you will never have $100. And so what I'm going to do is fine you to the extent of 20 bushels of corn against your crop. That is, when the harvesting time comes up, you will pay me 20 bushels of corn extra as fine for the loss, for the damage that you have caused to my rug. And he says, I'll add it in your contract. When you come to the commissary, you can sign it. That won't keep Mrs. D. Spain quiet, but maybe it will teach you to wipe your feet off before you enter her house again. Now mind you, Major D. Spain talks about his wife in the third person. He doesn't talk about her in the second person, not as his wife, but as a person who is totally removed from him. So he says, it will teach you to wipe your feet off before you enter her house again. He doesn't say my house. He doesn't acknowledge it, because he realizes that the house is most definitely that of Mrs. D. Spain. And then he was gone. The boy looked at his father, who still had not spoken or even looked up again, who was now adjusting the loggerhead in the ham. So Abner totally ignores Major D. Spain. And so the little boy starts off and he says, Pap. His father looks at him, and he's quiet. But the boy wants the father to have some kind of a bond. And he sort of defends the father, and he says, you done the best you could. If he wanted it done differently, why didn't he wait and tell you how? He won't get no 20 bushels. He won't get none. We'll get it hit and made it. I can watch. So the boy becomes very emotional, because remember the previous time he had been told by his father that he has to stand by his family. So now he comes up and he says, he's not going to get 20 bushels. We're not going to give him 1 bushel even. We'll harvest the corn and we'll hide the corn, and I will watch the corn. So he gets very emotional at this, and totally contradictory to the behavior that, for example, Abner shows, because Abner does not even listen to what Major D. Spain is saying. He doesn't acknowledge his presence at all. And instead what he says is, did you put the cutter back in that straight stalk like I told you? And the little boy says, no, sir. And Abner says, then go do it. So he doesn't want the boy talking. He is, as I said before, the strong, silent type. He does work, he gets people to do their work. He does not believe in idle talk. He doesn't believe in, for example, gossip or idle conversation. So the moment that his little son says, oh, we're going to fix him and we're not going to give him any 20 bushels, we're not going to give him any corn at all, the father says, did you do what I told you to? And he says, no, sir. So the father says, then go do it. That was Wednesday. During the rest of that week, he worked steadily at what was within his scope and some which was beyond it, with an industry that did not need to be driven nor even commanded twice. So during the rest of the week, the little boy works steadily and he works hard, and he doesn't ask his father any questions at all. And this is something that he had received from his mother, with the difference that something of what he did he liked to do. You know, the mother just does everything that she's told to do. She doesn't question her husband. She doesn't think whether it is right or wrong. She doesn't have a presence at all. She is there only to obey her husband's instructions, and that's it. So in the hard work that this little boy does, he's like the mother, but that's it. His mother doesn't like anything of what she's doing, but she has to do it. There's no way out, so she goes and does it. The little boy likes some of the things he's doing. For example, he likes splitting wood with the axe. It's a half-size axe, and it had been given to him as a Christmas present. And because they're a very poor family, so the concept of giving him a present is very carefully thought over, and ultimately this utilitarian present is given to him, which will not only make him happy, but which will also ensure that he becomes a part of the workforce. So this half-size axe that he is given, he loves to wield that. It's not that he thinks it's boring work. This is something that he loves to do. In company with the two older women, and on one afternoon even one of his sisters, he built pens for the shoat and the cow, which were a part of his father's contract with the landlord. So, you know, a 10-year-old building a pen, chopping wood for it, and then placing it strategically so that the shoat, that is the little one of the pig, and the cow do not wander off, because remember what I told you about farm animals being very, very important. They have to have pens so that they will not wander off. They have to have dry land underfoot so that their hooves do not become infected, etc., etc. So, you know, he considers himself an important member of the family, and in his father's absence, he tries to see what more he can do in order to make his presence felt, in order to make his father and his brother realize that he has grown up and that he can handle responsibility. And this includes, of course, turning up the soil on the land where they're going to be sharecropping. And while he is doing this, while he is working the plow in the land, he starts thinking of what possible ways he can get revenge on this landlord who has come and told Abner that he will have to pay a fine of 20 bushels of corn. So he starts dreaming and he starts thinking, and he goes into such a reverie that his father has his brother, who is in charge, has to really shake him. And all the time he is thinking that most probably the land that they are working on will not produce a total of 20 bushels. And if it's 20 bushels that they have to give to the landlord, that means that they will have nothing left for themselves. So throughout the week he kept on thinking of these, and then when Saturday came around, he looked up from beneath the mule he was harnessing and saw his father in the black coat and hat. And the father says, not the mule, it's the wagon gear that needs to be used today. So they're not going to ride the mules individually, but they're going to go in the wagon. Remember, this is the same wagon in which they had come in the beginning, and into which they had stuffed whatever household items they had. So when he hitches up the wagon, that means that there's more than 2 people riding. And that turns out to be true, because ultimately the people who are traveling in the wagon are this little boy, his brother, older brother, and of course his father. So you know, this is how things go about. But when Saturday comes around, he finds that his father is headed again for the market, or for the center of what was business or commerce, which is that small store that exists in the community, and where they do all their shopping as well as all their bargaining. This is the place where they are headed. So he sees the same kind of store that he had seen in the previous town in which they lived. And when he sees that store from the wagon, it's almost as if his heart sinks. The same scene is repeated in his mind. He goes up the same kind of steps. He sees the same kind of people. He sees almost the same number of people assembled in that in that made-up court inside the store. And as in on the previous occasion, he sees a man in spectacles sitting at the plank table. Now that plank table represents the desk inside a courtroom, the desk behind which the judge sits. And he didn't need to be told that this person was also a justice of the peace. But the difference is that where on the previous occasion he had been frightened of the justice of the peace, today he's confident, and not only confident, he has a kind of arrogant look about him, because he knows that his father was declared not guilty the first time. So he is confident that his father is not going to be found guilty this time, because Major D. Spain asked him to clean the rug, and Abner got his daughters to wash the rug. So according to him, there should have been no problem at all. So he looks at the justice of the peace and the rest of the people with a certain amount of defiance. And before the father can say anything, before the justice of the peace can say anything, so full of his emotions and thoughts is the little boy, that he just sort of rushes up and he says, "He ain't done it, he ain't burnt." And the justice of the peace wants to know, burnt? Do I understand the rug was burnt too? You know, he doesn't connect this occasion with the previous occasion, but the little boy at once jumps to the conclusion that only burnings are discussed in the court. So he just starts to say, you know, he didn't burn it, the barn down. And the father says, "Go back to the wagon." So the father realizes that this little boy is going to get him into trouble. So when he jumps up and he says, he ain't done it, he ain't burnt, the father says, "Go back to the wagon." And the judge says, "Burnt? Was the rug burned also?" And the father, you know, at once becomes angry and he says, "Does anyone here say that it was burned?" And at the same time he tells the little boy, "Go back to the wagon." So the little boy realizes that the father doesn't want him around. He doesn't go back to the wagon, but he retreats and he goes and stands at the end of the room, just like in the first scene that we saw in barn burning. You had the little boy standing at the end of the room, and the father in the front with the justice of the peace. So he just stands very quietly amongst all the elders, amongst all the adults who have gathered here to see what cases are to be discussed and decided on that day. So the judge says, "And you claim 20 bushels of corn is too high a damage for what you did to the rug?" And Abner says, "He brought the rug to me and said he wanted the tracks washed out of it. I washed the tracks out and took the rug back to him." So Abner, from his point of view, is absolved of any crime. And the judge says, "But you didn't carry the rug back to him in the same condition it was in before you made the tracks on it." So the judge, like Major D. Spain, says that you didn't leave the rug in the same condition, because you washed the tracks out, but you spoiled the rug anyhow. It was not the kind of rug that is washed. You know, this is a bit like, let's say, clothes that you get dry cleaned. Now, if it is written on a garment, dry clean only, then you should not wash it, because if you do wash it, it either shrinks or something else happens to it, it's spoiled in some way. And so it cannot be the same as it was in its original condition. So when the judge says that, "Do you claim the 20 bushels of corn is too high a fine to pay?" His father is silent. And his silence irritates the judge, and he says, "You decline to answer that, Mr. Snopes?" And Abner does not respond at all. Now, when he doesn't respond, silence is as good as admitting that you have done wrong. So the judge says, "I'm going to find against you, Mr. Snopes. I'm going to find out that you were responsible for the injury to Major D. Spain's rug and hold you liable for it. But although I'm convinced that you did wrong and that you spoilt Major D. Spain's rug, yet I also know that 20 bushels of corn are going to be too high for you. Major D. Spain claims that it cost $100, and October corn will be worth about 50 cents. I figured, and this is really hilarious, you need to pay attention to this part. The justice says, I figured that if Major D. Spain can stand a $95 loss on something he paid cash for, you can stand a $5 loss you haven't earned yet. He's referring to the fact that the rug is still spoiled, and the $100 have gone down the drain. So he says that at the same time as I hold you responsible for Major D. Spain's damaged rug, yet I cannot fine you $100 because you are never going to have $100. So since I can't do that, what I can do is move the $95 charge to Major D. Spain so that he takes proper care of the rug. And what I'll do is I'll add 10 bushels of corn to the contract that you are going to sign. So the balance that you see between the rich and the poor is that the rich man is fined $95, whereas the poor fellow is fined only 10 bushels of corn, and he adjourns the court. It hadn't taken much time, and it was still before the morning had dawned. He thought that, this, and these are the musings of the little boy's minds. He thinks that they are going to go back to the fields, and he's very surprised when his father turns into such a harsh man. So, he doesn't even communicate with his own children. He doesn't communicate with this little boy who demands attention, who has to have the proper the proper kind of environment to grow in. So Abner would just issue instructions, and with his hand he would do this. This is where you throw water. That's the place. So these and other words Abner does not use. He hardly ever speaks, and when he does speak, it is to give instructions to his elder son, or more and more now to the younger son. So the younger son, of course, feels very emotional. The older son, you see, is slightly in the background, and he's also the quiet type, just like his father. And just then, they have this small conversation where the little boy pipes up and he says, "Oh, we're not going to give him any corn. Let's go back a bit." And he says, "We're not going to give him 10 bushels. We're going to keep it, hide it, and not have to hand it over to Major D. Spain." And of course, his father starts thinking, and he says, "Do you really think that this situation can exist?" And the little boy is very, very emotional, and he says, "We're not going to let him do it. We'll find a way," etc., etc., etc. So when they return from the court, contrary to what the little boy expects, the father stops in this shop where he gets the wagon fixed, and then he just takes it to this little stream and he lets the horses stand in the water so that they cool down, because horses or mules or mares, when they're running, they sort of heat up. And so he tells the little boy that the horses need to be taken to the spring branch. So they just stand there, they're nuzzling into the water, they're enjoying the water, etc., etc. And he waits for his father to say, okay, that's enough, let's go home now. But on this one occasion, his father does not say that, because he's still sitting there trying to exchange news of what has happened and what is likely to happen, etc., etc. And so when the horses have drunk their fill of water and when they are rested enough, the father says, take them to the shade and hitch. So take them to a shady place, and there you can tie these horses or hitch these horses up to the wagon. He does that, he comes back, his father and the smith have been joined by a third man who's also squatting in the ground. So they're discussing all kinds of things. And when the boy sits down, he hears his father telling a long and unhurried story out of the time before the birth of the older brother, even before when he had been a professional horse trader. And then his father came up beside him where he stood before a tethered last year's circus poster on the other side of the store, and he is gazing with a lot of attention, and the father says, it's time to eat. So when it's time to eat, they eat. Otherwise, they just keep on waiting until the father gives that order. So he sits down beside his father and brother, and you see, it makes him feel very grown up. It gives him the feeling that he can understand what the grown-ups are talking about, and he can take part in that conversation. So when he comes out of the store, the father has a paper sack, and in this paper sack he carries cheese. Now, because it is only cheese, what he does is he divides it into 3 equal portions, and from the same bag he produces some crackers. And so they squat on the gallery, they squat on the ground, and they start eating because all of them are hungry, so he so they have this meal outside, and it's kind of like a picnic because they don't have it otherwise in the book. This is about the only place where Faulkner digresses from his initial aim of presenting the degeneration of the southern states. So his father seems to be in no hurry, and this is very strange because normally his father doesn't pay any attention to him on the pretext that he does not have time. So they are just sitting there and not going home, and the boy starts to feel that there has to be more to it than he can see. So he sits on the rail fence and he starts to observe what is happening and what is it that they are discussing. So he discusses business with these people, and he finds out the prices of certain objects, certain animals, etc., etc., that he can use later on if and when they require it. Now, when his father is discussing these things with the smithy, with the others there, the little boy doesn't know what is being said. But under the surface, the father's anger is boiling because the justice of the peace has fined him 10 bushels of corn for a sharecropper is a lot of corn, and he realizes that if he gives 10 bushels of corn to Major D. Spain, he is not going to have anything left for his family. He is not going to have enough to sell and make some money for his family. So he is seething with anger inside, and when they return home and they've had their supper, he hears his mother crying out, and what his mother is saying is, "Abner, no, no, oh God, Abner," and his mother is sounding scared. Now the little boy doesn't know what is going on, but when he rises and sees what his father is doing and what he's planning, his blood freezes in his veins, and what his father is doing is that he is emptying out the oil in the lamp back into the 5-gallon kerosene can. In other words, he is getting ready to do a bit of what? Yes, barn burning. So he tells his son, the little one, he says, "Go to the barn and get that can of oil we were oiling the wagon with." So he's collecting all the oil in the household, and the son is struck dumb as to what the father is planning. They've been here 4 or 5 days, and at once his father had struck up an enmity with the landlord. So the little boy is, totally confused and doesn't know what to do. And the father's and he says, "What are you?" And the father says, "Go get that oil. Go." So when he gets this command from his father, he doesn't know what to do. He wants to run away. He wants to run away as fast as possible because he doesn't want to have anything to do with a barn burning anymore. And so he starts to run away, but his father will not allow him to do that. So he says, "Aren't you even going to send a Negro? The last time you did barn burning, you sent a Negro in advance to warn the landlord. This time, aren't you going to do that?" And his father's hand comes down, and instead of hitting him, he catches hold of the collar of his shirt, and he just sort of carries him. Remember, the father is tall and strong, and the boy is only 10 years old, so he just carries him along, and he sort of dumps him before his mother. Now, the older brother or the older son of Abner has seen this happening many times before. So all that he says is, tie this boy to the bedpost, otherwise he is going to mess up the father says, empty the can into the big one and go on. I'll catch up with you. So the younger boy struggles. The younger boy does not want to be a party to it, but the older boy is all right. You know, whatever the father says, the older boy doesn't really have a mind of his own. So he's willing to go along with whatever the father says or does. So when he says, you better tie him to the bedpost, the father says, you go and do what I've told you to do, and you don't tell me anything else. And so carrying this little boy, he comes and he dumps him into the mother's arms, and he says, hold him. Now, the aunt and the mother are both sitting on the bed, and the aunt makes a move to catch hold of him because, you know, she's the khala, the loving aunt, and she wants to take care of the little boy. But the father says, not you. And he says, you take hold of him, and I want to see you do it. So, you know, he knows that these two women are going to favor the little boy, and they might let him go. So he says, you hold on to him. You're not going to give him to his aunt because she might let him go. And then, you know, he gets the idea that his son has given him, and that is to tie him up. And as soon as he says, maybe I'd better tie him up, the mother says, no, I'll hold him. She doesn't want her son tied up. So she says, I'll hold him. And the father says, see you do then. And so he leaves, and then once he has left, the little boy starts to struggle, and before you know it, he has set himself free, because, you know, he starts biting, and he starts struggling and hitting out at the mother and the aunt, and the aunt says, let him go, because if he doesn't go, I'll go. And what she's referring to is going to the landlord and warning him that Abner intends to burn down the barn. So when the aunt says this, the mother says, don't you see I can't? Sarti, you remember his name is Colonel Sartoris. So she says, Sati, no, help me, Lizzie. So she can't hold on to Sartoris, and she calls out to her sister to hold him. But, you know, he is free because he's small, but he's very strong. And his mother and his aunt are not as strong as he is. So the aunt tries to hold on to him, the mother tries to hold on to him, but he runs, and he runs like a mad person. The aunt calls out to the sisters, the mother calls out to the sisters, and they say, catch him. But the sisters, you know, in the very beginning, Faulkner has told us that they were like pigs, bloated pigs, who were very slow of movement, who never did any work at all. And so when the mother and aunt scream and shout and says, you know, catch him, the sisters do not even react, because they're so lazy, they don't want to do anything at all. And so this boy, he just runs out of the room, out of the house, in the mild dust of the starlit road and the heavy ripeness of honeysuckle, the pale ribbon unspooling with terrific slowness under his running feet. So he runs like a madman, and he runs to this huge palace of a house. He runs up the steps, and he sees that there are lights in the house, and he just barges into the house, sobbing for breath, incapable for the moment of speech. He can't even speak, you know, because he's been running so fast. He sees the face of the Negro. He says, Despain, where's Despain? And before he's completed that, he sees Major Despain, and by that time he's so short of breath and he's so panicky that all he can say is barn, barn. And then, you know, the same moment he moves out again and he rushes back, and Major Despain says, what, barn? And the boy says, yes, barn. So he's giving him a clue. And Major Despain tells his servant, catch him. And the black servant moves to catch him, but before he can do so, the boy who's moving at the speed of light has already moved out of the house. And he runs and he runs and he runs. And he does not stop. Even when he hears Major Despain riding up behind him, all that he does is he throws himself into the ditch beside the path or the road, and he doesn't stop. And as soon as Major Despain has run past him, because Major Despain is running towards his barn, when he goes there, the little boy comes out of the ditch and he runs down the drive. Now remember, this drive is the one that connects the sharecropper's house with the landlord's. So he runs and he runs, and presently he comes out onto the road. He can't see anything because it is dark. He can't hear anything, it's like he is panic-stricken as to what is going to happen again. They've been here for 4 days. It's not even a week, and already his father is planning to set the barn on fire. So he runs and he runs, and he doesn't realize where he's going until he runs right past the house, and that's where he hears the shot, and he says, Pap, Pap. Now his feelings are mixed. His mind is confused. He has been told that he must be loyal to his father, but he knows that what his father is doing is wrong. It was wrong when he did it in the previous village, and it's wrong now when he plans with his family to burn down the landlord's barn. So the little boy cannot bear it, and this is sort of the place where Faulkner tells us that he switches sides, and instead of standing with his family, he goes and does the right thing, because this is the moment of choice. This is the moment when he has to decide what he's going to do. Stay with his family and break the law again and again, or stay on the side of the right and abandon his family. So when he looks back, he cannot see anything. It's dark, although there are some stars out, but he still cannot see anything, and he just sobs and cannot do anything, because he has committed himself now. By going to Major Despain, he cannot go back to his father. He has sort of burned his boats as far as his family is concerned, and he keeps on running until midnight finds him on the crest of a hill. He didn't know what time it was, and he didn't know how far he had traveled, but there was no glare behind him now, And he sat now his back toward what he had called home for 4 days anyhow, his face towards the dark woods which he would enter when breath was strong again, small, shaking steadily in the chill darkness, hugging himself into the remainder of his thin, rotten shirt, the grief and despair now no longer terror and fear, but just grief and despair. Father, my father, he thought. So when he finds himself on the crest of a hill, he doesn't know how he got there. All that he does know is that he doesn't have the glare of the burning barn at his back. What he does have is the place that he has called home for the last 4 days. He has committed himself. He's told Major D. Spain, and although it's cold, it's chilly, and he has lost one of the sleeves of his shirt, which, remember, when he rushed into D. Spain's house and rushed out again, and the black servant grabbed at him, all that he got hold of was a sleeve. And because the shirt was so old and rotten, when the black servant grabbed at the sleeve came off. So now when he's sitting here at the crest of a hill, thinking of what has happened, thinking of what he has done, he feels cold, but he realizes that he has done the right thing. Although there is grief, there's despair, but there's no terror and no fear. The terror and fear that he had experienced earlier had been because of his father, and now that his father is no more, he does not feel any terror, he does not feel scared, but he does feel grief and despair. And all of a sudden, when he is sitting on this hill, at the top of the hill, he starts thinking about his father, and he says, he was brave. He was. So what he's trying to do now, and what Faulkner is trying to emphasize here, is the confusion in the boy's mind. He has committed himself to the side of the right. In doing that, he has condemned his father to death. And now that the fact or the act has been accomplished, he tries to rationalize his father's behavior. And he says, my father was brave. You know, he was in the army. He fought with Colonel Sartoris. He was in the cavalry. But what the little boy doesn't realize is that, yes, Abner fought in the war, but Abner fought in the war as a mercenary. He did not fight for a cause. He didn't fight because he favored the Confederate cause, or because he felt that the Union Army was being cruel. He fought in the war, he participated in the war because there was money to be made, and all that he was interested in was the money. So, or the booty, as Faulkner calls it. So while he is sitting on this hill, he just starts to think about everything that has happened in the last few days, and he tries to rationalize it, but it's very difficult for him to do that. And Faulkner ends this story on a very sort of representative paragraph. When the little boy looks upwards, and Faulkner says, the slow constellations wheeled on. It would be dawn and then sun up after a while, and he would be hungry. But that would be tomorrow, and now he was only cold, and walking would cure that. So when he looks up, he sees that the stars above are moving in their own orbits, and the confusion in his mind is gone. The only feeling that he has is grief and despair. And he's feeling cold, and he decides that, the cold he can do away with if he starts to walk. So his breathing is easier now, and he decides to get up and go on, and then finds out that he had been asleep. Now, he did not realize that he had gone off to sleep. Remember, when he reaches the crest of this hill, it's midnight. But he doesn't know the time because there are no landmarks, there's no light, there's no sun by which he can determine the time. So when he starts walking again, it's almost daybreak, and he sees the scenery around him has changed from what it was the night before. So he gets up, he's a little stiff, but he thinks walking will cure that also, and soon there would be the sun. So in the beginning it's going to be hard for him. There's a lot of symbolism in these last couple of paragraphs, and Faulkner says that when the boy gets up, he's a little stiff. Now the reference is to the boy surviving on his own in this world, having the handicap of the mother and sister to support, having the handicap of two unmarried sisters to support. He will still be able to make something of his life, and he only has to try. So when he gets up and he starts walking, he's a little stiff, which shows that he will most likely have problems in the beginning. But if he does not look back, and if he only looks ahead, looks forward, then he will be able to make a success of his life. Unlike his father, who picked up quarrels wherever he went. Now, before we wind up today's lecture, let me quickly recap what we've done today. We managed to complete Faulkner's story, Barn Burning, and the parts that we discussed today is where Abner, the sharecropper, and the little boy's father moves to a new place, and the very day that he moves to this new place, he goes with his little boy to see what the new landlord is going to be like, and he starts off on a wrong foot, because the moment that he enters the house, in spite of the fact that the black servant tells him to wipe his feet, he steps inside the hall, steps right onto the blonde rug that Mrs. de Spain loves and which is cherished by Mrs. de Spain, and leaves giant footprints, muddy footprints on the rug. So obviously Mrs. de Spain is angry with him, she is displeased, and when she is upset and displeased, so is Major de Spain. So when he sort of comes to complain to Abner, and he brings the rug with him and he tells him to wash it out, Abner passes on the instructions to his daughters, who of course wash the rug half-heartedly, so that it's worse off than before. And once that rug has dried out, Abner puts the little boy onto the mule, puts the rug before the little boy, and goes to deliver it to the landlord. But instead of following the common decent way of doing things, he just dumps the rug outside the door and he comes back. So Major Despain comes riding up to him with that rug and he says, see what you've done. You know, you've spoilt the rug, you haven't cleaned it properly. And Abner is not at all bothered. You know, he's totally ignoring Major Despain. And Major Despain gets very angry and he says, you know, the rug cost $100 and Mrs. Despain loves this rug and she got it all the way from France. You are never going to see $100, but I'm going to make sure that you pay for this stupid thing that you've done, and I'm going to fine you 20 bushels of corn. I'm going to include that in your contract when you come to sign it in the commissary, and I'm going to tell everybody what you have done. So what happens is that Abner doesn't pay any attention to Major Despain. Major Despain takes this matter to court. So rewind and relive through the scene that the little boy had witnessed not even a week back in another store in another village. But the same kind of person is presiding over the court, the same kind of people are milling around in the store, and the difference is that this time, because Abner had spoilt the rug, he is, and there's evidence. The judge says, I cannot fine you 20 bushels of corn because you're not going to make that much in this place. So what I will do is fine you 10 bushels of corn. Now this is something that Abner cannot take. So on the way back, he discusses things with some of the people he meets, and when night comes around, he starts gathering all the oil in the house. That is when the little boy's mind sort of flips and he realizes that his father is going to set the barn again on fire. That's the ultimate punishment for an agriculturist, for a landlord. And so the boy goes rushing out of the house and he goes up to Major Despain's house and he shouts in his presence, barn, barn. And Major Despain tries to catch hold of him. The black servant tries to catch hold of him, but he's running so fast that he's in and out of the house before they can catch him, before they can catch hold of him. And so he runs out and he sees Major Despain running behind him on his horse. He dives onto the side. Major Despain continues running. Very soon he hears a gunshot, and then all is quiet. But he realizes that he has to save himself. He has to live his own life. So he continues running, and he does not stop. And when he does stop, he realizes that he has reached the crest of a hill. And that's where he goes off to sleep. When he wakes up, he realizes that he cannot go back to that house because he has been responsible for everything that happened. He has been responsible for Major Despain coming galloping out and shooting his father. So he decides not to go back because he has made his choice. He has taken the path of justice, and he refuses to take his father's side. He refuses to take the side of the family if it is a matter of justice. So when the dawn breaks, it finds this little boy, 10 years old only, moving on, hoping for a better life. Faulkner ends the story on a positive note, in the sense that the boy has made a choice. He has decided to stay on the side of the right, and he is not ever going to take the side of the family when it is a matter of the difference between right and wrong. Thank you for being patient with me, and Allah Hafiz.